So we are going to be talking about this static, which is this keyword over here. Okay, this keyword over here, in order for me to introduce it to you, I just would like first of all to show you some of the advantages of those things. I mean, some of the things that we are able to do because of it, of this static. And one of that thing is, let's first use something that exists already, that is already shipped with the JDK, which is one of a very interesting class, which is the math class. The math class is an interesting class because it allows us to, this is the math class. It allows us to access right away some interesting methods and variables. For example, this pi, I can use just math.py and then maybe just print this on the screen. And now if I run this, you're going to see that it is going to display the value of pi with a lot of decimal places. So I don't need, if I need the pi, I don't need to memorize it. All I need to do just math.py and it is available and I can use it. Did you realize that this math is a class? If I click on it, you can see this is a class math, and it has a lot of different static, static, pi, and so on. So all these static ones make us use this pi this way. This math class this way. All other classes that we've been using, if we would like to use a class, we need to do the instantiation, create the object from that class. Like, for example, do something like this. Right? But with this class, we're not doing this. We can access all the public variables even if we do not create an object from that, just by using the name of the class dot and then the name of the variable. But this can only be used if that name of that variable is declared as static. So static is going to make access to those variables and put them in a place where they're going to be stored. I mean, they're going to be available in the memory as long as the program is running. Okay, this being said, let's try something interesting. Actually, we're talking about now instance variables. I mean, now we're not talking about instance variables. When we use the static, we're calling them class variables, because these variables are not bound to just one instance, one object, but they are bound to all the objects from that class. Let me give you an example of, and you'll understand more what I mean. Let's try to create another class. Let's name it whatever, student, because we're familiar with that class student. And in that class student, I am going to declare like public ID as an int and public string name. Okay, that's enough just to test the class. I'm not going to create any other methods. We might be doing something later on, but just to test that class, if I just would like to show you something. Now I have a student that I can declare an object of student, but if I put student dot, I'm not able to see anything because I do not have a class variable. I have an instance variable, which means if I declare a student s, which is a new instance of student, then the s, the instance, has the variables that can be accessed from this from outside of the class. But I cannot just use right away just the name of the class with the dot and have access to those variables. But you understand that if now I put this as static, so now what I'm doing, I'm making this ID accessible student just by typing the name of the class, and that's it. And of course I can put any value if I want. That's not a problem. I can extract the value from that as well. without a problem neither. So what's the real advantage of that then? Well, one of the advantages is, for example, making that variable accessible for all instances, for the whole class. I'm not going to make it just for one instance, but let me just show you one implication of this decision if you decide to create them, to define them as static. Let's have a look at this example. We created this S1, okay? And S1 is going to be S1 dot name. Oh, but where's the ID? I don't have S1 dot ID. Weird. If I would like to put the ID, I need to put it for the whole class. So now this ID is not for one student, for one object of that class, but this ID is for all objects of that same class. So if I have, let's say I have another student, S2, it doesn't exist. Look, S1 does not have the ID as an object, an instance variable. The ID, because I put it as static, this is a class variable, not an instance variable, which means if I put the name of the class and then the ID, I can access it. If I put a name of an object of that class, I cannot access it because it belongs to the whole class. And let me show you something. For example, if I have S1 and S2, can I have two different names for S1 and S2? Yes, of course. There are no problems about having different names. Can I have different IDs? No. Because I cannot have S1.id, S2.id. I have one ID for all the instances, all the objects from that class, because it is static. And I have every name for each one of those instances, of those different objects from that class. Each one will have a different name. It becomes like? Exactly. It becomes like some sort of, we can change it. As you can see, I can put something inside of it. But some sort, this ID is shared among all different instances. So S1, what's his ID of S1? That's this one, this number. What's the ID of S2? The same one. Yes.
Is it same when we declare some variable final?
No, final is something different. I'm going to be talking about it later on. Final is different. Actually, we spoke about it a long time ago when we said we would like to fix something and not allow it to be changed. We put it as final, like make it a constant. So, for example, pi. Do I need this pi to be changeable? No, it should not, because pi stays pi. Says pi for the whole life of whatever you're going to be doing. So that's why they set this as final, because they don't want you to change this value, because pi is pi. This is a constant. It is not meant to be changed. So that's why we're not doing that. For example, if you're doing the same, if you'd like to put this as final, no problems. You just put static final and then int, but then let's put a value inside of it. For example, now all my IDs, all my students will have the same ID, and the ID is not accepting to be changed, because it said, oh, you cannot change the ID. I set it as final. So the final means you cannot change the content from a variable. So you make it, by making it final, you make it a constant that does not change. So, but this doesn't have to do with this static. Static is doing one simple thing. If you declare a variable to be static, this variable is going to be shared among all different instances of that class. By instances, I mean any object that I declare from that class is going to share that same property, this ID over here. It is not a property of just one object. It's a property for any object of that class. So you don't have a lot of them. Is this clear? So when you set a variable to be static, that variable have two properties now. It is shared among all different objects. Plus, I can use it without the need of instantiating. I can just use it without the need of doing this. Just right away type the name of the class and put a value, and that's it. That's enough. We don't need to instantiate, like do something like this. Because this ID belongs to the class, it doesn't belong to the instance. And the name is an instance variable, which means if I try to just type the name of the class dot, I will not see the name because the name is not static. So it's going to tell me, sorry, I cannot find this variable name. So this is what happens when you're using a static in the in a variable. Any questions? So this is done. Static variable. We know now with a static variable, when we declare a variable in a class to be static, then that variable is becoming a variable that belongs to the whole class, and all instances of that class are going to share that same variable. So it's become like some sort of a shared resource where all the different instances, they can just put things or extract things from it. Now, what happens if I'd like to have a static method? Okay, now this was for the static variable. For the static method, it's the same idea. Let's have a look at this again, the math class, because with the math class, if I'd like to do any of these mathematical operations, I can just select type the math dot, and this is for the cosine. And if I need to I don't know, let's look for example, make a power of something, some in power, so something power to something else. I can also extract some random numbers between 0 and 1. I can round. You know what round means? For example, I have a number that has like 3 decimal places. I would like to round it to 1 decimal place. So it is going to try to perform this rounding. For example, 2.55. If I'd like to round it to 1 decimal place, it is going to give me 2.6. So how to make this go to the next integer based on how many decimal places that I decide. This is the round. So there are some methods that I can use without the need of instantiating an object. Square root, sqrt. This is the square root. These are the most common ones probably that we use. Look at this. Okay, in here we have a lot of different things to remember. First of all, this is a method that finds the maximum of 2 numbers. Remember there was a question about finding the max, and you had to use some ifs, and if it was like 2 questions. So imagine if I tell you have like the maximum of this number and that number, and then all you had to do is just use this and display it on the screen, whatever. And this is the maximum of those 2 numbers. So those 2 numbers can come from the user or whatever. So you can also use this, and there's an if else there. Or maybe, anyway, if you'd like to find the maximum of 3 numbers, you could have used just with the maximum, something like this. So you find the maximum of those 2 numbers, and the maximum of those 2 numbers, you compare it with to find the maximum with this number and the maximum of those 2 numbers. So now you're having the maximum of those 3 numbers. So anyways, I'm just showing you that you could have used this math.max or math.min instead of your if, else if, and whatever to find the minimum or maximum of those numbers. In arrays, well, now in arrays you have to do them manually because you need to check each each one at a time. Probably what you could do, put this in a loop and then compare each two with them, put for example AI, and you compare it to an array and for example I plus 1, something like that, where A is an array of int, and then you compare and you put this in a loop. This is possibly a way to deal with arrays and use this maximum to find some maximum within an array. But remember, this is just to introduce the static methods, and methods that are static, I can use them without the need of creating an instance. That's the same principle. So I can just do this pow, for example 5 a power of 3, which should be what? So is equal to, so what is that? 24?
125.
125? Because 5 multiplied by 5, that's 25. 25 multiplied by 5, 125. And that's, so this is a way, if I'd like just to use these formulas, I just can use them like some sort of a mathematical function. Of course, if you look at this, I mean, there's something. If I go back here, and I can see that this is pow, and notice that actually there's a lot of pows. Actually, this one is it's working only with doubles. So it converts only to doubles. If you don't have a double, it is not going to be working fine. Maybe the other one, that one was with the max. I wanted to talk about it, then I forgot. Or abs. Let's go for the max. You see, there's so many maxes. I have this max over here. Max, another max, but this one is long, the other one is int. And are you familiar with this one? What is that? Well, this is a very simple thing actually. If you have something like, if you have a question A, and let's put this student.id for example, just to test, because we have already a variable, is greater than 5, or 5, let's say. I don't know. If it's greater than 5, put 0. Else, in this, put -1. So this if-else can be compressed, shortened, and the short version of that is by using this and this. So if this is my question, if this is this greater than 5, this is a question. If yes, this is what you're going to be doing. If no, this is what you're going to be doing. And since this is my question, I'm going just to sorry? I have to use if? Why? No. If this is a question, if the answer to this question is true, this is what I'm doing. If the answer to this question is false, this is what I should be doing. So that's the thing. So I'm just because this is something, and maybe let me. That's why actually this is returning something. So this is some sort of. Oh no. Oh, this is returning something. Okay, let me. Yeah, this was my mistake. I should do something like this. No, actually, look at this student.id. I am going to put 0 or -1. If this question is true, I'm going to put 0 inside of it. If it's false, I'm going to put -1 inside of it, right? And this is a shortened version of that same one. It's exactly actually the same thing. I'm asking this question. Is the student ID greater than 5? Yes. Then, okay, put this 0, put it inside, return that 0 to put it inside of this ID. If no, if this is false, then it is going to return -1 and put it inside of this ID. this is a shortened version. Anyways, if it's bothering you, you can still always use this if else, but sometimes we would like to use some short versions. So anyways, this is one thing from this, and when we have two methods with the same name, this is called, well, the signature is, I mean, the name and the number and order and the data types of those parameters. But the fact that I have two methods with the same name and different signatures is called method overloading. Method overload, that was last week. Don't format your PC before the end of the semester. So anyways, so this is overloading. So let's go back to this. So I opened the big parenthesis just to go back and talk about this math.pow or any method that is static. If I'd like to create a method that is static, very simple. I just need to be using public static void, for example, and display. I'm going to name it display, and inside of that, let's just display name equal plus name. And what about here? Look at this, because I named it wrong. Maybe lowercase name is more appropriate. And let's have the ID equal. If I type ID here, will it be okay?
Should be an int because it's number.
Well, I can add an int inside of a text to concatenate the int with the text and to display it on the screen, so that's permissible. I can do something like this, for example. Right? So it's not a problem with the int. So it is working, but there's something weird. It tells me, look, you have a problem. And this is very important to understand. This is one, well, we understood that when we declared static, a variable static, that this variable is going to be shared among all different instances or objects of that class. And it belongs to the class, it doesn't belong to the object or the instance. But now I'm trying to do the same. I'm assuming that I have a method, if I declare it as static, it is not going to be not a method for this instance or an object, but a method for the whole class. That's true. But there's another problem. There's something that I need to always be aware of when I'm creating or defining some static methods. And this is why I have this error message, and if I read it, it tells me non-static variable name cannot be referenced from a static context. Which translates to name is not static, you cannot use it in a method which is static. In a static method, you can only use static variables. So I cannot do something like this. So I can do it if I convert this to be static. Now that's fine. That's not a problem anymore. But if I'd like to make a method static, all the different variables inside of that method that are used inside of that method should be static, because this is not a variable that belongs to an instance, but to the whole class. It doesn't mean that if I'm declaring a variable here, it has to be static. I just would like to be clear about this. It doesn't mean this. I'm not talking about these variables. I'm talking about those variables from outside of this method, like these two. The variables that are outside, coming from outside of this method, if they are not static, you cannot use them in a static method. So that's the only requirement. Is it okay? There's another requirement actually, and let's do something. Just look at this example. I'm going to make it public, and whatever. Just for example, int, and I'm going to get ID, which is called This has a name. This type of method has a name. What is it? Sorry? Constructor? No. What is the constructor? The constructor is a method that has the same name as the class. So this is not a constructor. Well, the signature is the name and the parameters, data types, and order. A getter, yes. What we used another name, yes. A what? Return by reference? No, that's completely different things. Which is, I mean, pass by value and pass by reference, which is something within the parameters themselves. So no, I'm not talking about that neither. MashaAllah, final exam is approaching and everybody's forgetting everything. And this was probably like 2 weeks, maybe last 2 weeks, I'm guessing. Maybe just last week. No, it was last week either. Yeah? Anyways, this is called either mutators or accessors. So which one is this one? Mutator? No. Yeah, well, that, yeah. Mutator, you know, mutant. You know what is a mutant? A mutation, a change. Something that changes, something that mutates, that changes. So am I changing something from here? No. So I'm accessing only this. I'm getting access to the ID. So this is an accessor because I have access now to ID. If I hadn't, for example, for whatever reason, if it was private, for example, I could not access ID, but now I can because of this accessor. Okay? So you have to do some small review. So it's not complicated, but you have a lot of different names and definitions, and just not to get confused, don't leave your review until the end of the semester and then just before the final you're going to start doing that. So pay attention to not forget things as we do them. So so we have, let's say, this get ID that returns the ID, and just would like to show it as another requirement if you'd like to use another method. Exactly the same problem that happened with the variables. If I'd like to use a variable, it should be static. If I'd like to use a method, well, that method should be static. Now if it's the method static, there are no problems anymore. So when I'm using a static method, there are two type of rules. Ones that are related to the variables that I'm using, those variables comes from outside of that method, they should be static. Also the methods that I'm using from outside, of course, from outside that method, the method that I'm using, they should be static as well. So these are the simple introductory facts about those methods, the static methods and static variables. Inshallah, next class we're going to be talking more into details and seeing and doing some practical exercises regarding those. I have put online some self-test questions that I didn't save, probably because I'm not seeing them. Oh, they're here. I just had to reload. Okay, so they're here. So check those exercises. Inshallah, for next class we're going to practice some of what we did.